Hi.
Hello again. In the last segment, Ray was making a contrast with the help of his Uncle Fred between the example of J.F. Rutherford and the early leaders of the New Testament church. That Rutherford apparently excused himself from the public preaching work because, of course, the office of president prevented him from taking time for such activities. Whereas in the book of Acts, you plainly have the leaders of the church, that is the apostles and a few others like Philip and Stephen and Apollos, being the ones out doing public preaching. The only ones mentioned doing public preaching. You don't notice that when you're a witness, of course, because you're encouraged to think that everybody went door to door. So how did this emphasis on door to door reach the consciousness and become an unquestioned assumption behind every Jehovah's Witnesses contrast between what they do, the witnesses do, and every other religion or every other church does? Well, this emphasis, of course, gained momentum first during Rutherford's reign, not during Russell's, and then even more so in the era of Nathan Knorr, as Ray Franz points out on page 193 of In Search of Christian Freedom, under the heading A Business-Like Approach. With Rutherford's death and his replacement by Nathan Knorr, a new era of expansion began. Whereas Rutherford's presidency had a political cast to it, Knorr's presidency reflected his businessman's approach. Nathan once said to Ed Dunlap that if he had not pursued a religious career, he would have liked to have been the manager of a large department store, such as Wanamaker's of New York. He greatly expanded and modernized the Society's printing facilities in Brooklyn and set up many new branch offices internationally, and expanded already existing ones, establishing modern printing plants in many of the larger countries of the world. Under his direction, the Watchtower Society became one of the largest publishing organizations on the face of the earth. Initial printing of a new publication in English regularly was set at 1 million or more copies.
This vast printing capacity represented an appetite to be met, and I have personally heard Nathan and other upper-level personnel say, "We have to keep those presses busy." Idle equipment represented financial expense. The way the printing facilities could be or would be kept busy was to move out what they produced and make way for publishing more, usually with one or more new books released each year. The primary outlet for this stream of publications has consistently been the witnesses' door-to-door activity, along with quotas of hours to be met, if one was to be exemplary. Magazine quotas came into effect for congregation publishers, each being urged to distribute 12 copies a month.
The report slip has perennially been a major means for keeping this activity at a high level. The idea, often expressed, that these reports are needed for the organization to know how to plan its printing activity is a fiction. None of the Society's printing plants relies on such reports, for they gauge the demand not by the field service reports, but by inventory reports from their own shipping departments, and by monthly inventory reports received from the branches.
After posting on the publisher's record card, the individual field service reports are tabulated and compiled monthly by each congregation and forwarded to the organization's Brooklyn headquarters or outside the United States to one of its branch offices. Each branch office sends in monthly reports to Brooklyn, dealing primarily with this publishing activity: field service hours, literature movement, related financial records. These are then compiled into a world record, which is studied and analyzed for any signs of weakening. No other spiritual activity or facet of Christian life is the focus of anything approaching comparable scrutiny or is the object of such consistent concern. The report is viewed as the principal barometer of the spiritual health of the membership. Congregation elders know that low figures in any aspect of congregational field service activity will inevitably be called to their attention by traveling representatives, circuit and district overseers, with the responsibility laid on themselves to see that the report improves. The extent of their own participation in such activity often determines whether they retain their eldership or lose it. Branch offices around the world receive annual zone visits by governing body members and other representatives, and these visits focus particularly on this field service activity and the degree of success with which the branch committee is promoting it.
In view of all this, one can see why the memorandum to President Knorr by writing Department Head Carl Adams and the concerns expressed therein had a basis in fact. Few witnesses, however, realize that the points expressed in that 1971 memorandum have since been related many times by active, responsible elders as well as by concerned traveling representatives of the organization, and that their expressions were brought to the governing body's attention a number of times over the years. So in other words, Carl Adams was not the only one to bring to the governing body's attention, he being not a member of the governing body or not even anointed, these concerns about the pressure element, the overriding of men's consciences and the replacement of their motivation, love should be, by pressure from above, from the society.
And the sole concentration on one activity.
Yeah.
Of the people.
The measure, literally the only thing that counts for the Watchtower apparently are the statistics about hours and publications.
Yeah.
And we know from our own personal experience in the Watchtower how that works out. Although the numbers the Watchtower publishes of publications grew every year, and that by the time we left, I think they were publishing something like 10 million copies of both Awake and Watchtower each week. So I think, whereas he says in here that they were one of the greatest publishing concerns on the planet, I think by the time I left, they were the biggest private publishing concern on the planet. And yet we know that for a lot of publishers, those magazines were just piling up.
Yeah, it's a bit of an illusion because they have an instant audience. You know, all the publishers are going to order not what they are going to place, but what they're supposed to order.
Yeah.
You know, the quota they're supposed to meet, and then you end up with a closet full of magazines or
and books.
Yeah. So a lot of these magazines are not really out there with the public. A lot of them are just accumulating in the basements of Jehovah's Witnesses.
And I remember we as pioneers would often try to clean out the closet by taking extra magazines, and there were a lot of them, to laundromats
on rainy days and
bus shelters, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Although we were kind of discouraged from doing that, and we were certainly discouraged from just handing them out free. But then I remember just before we left, things changed again.
Yeah, because then we got into the position where we weren't supposed to ask for any money for anything.
In Canada, anyway.
Yeah. And I heard later, because this was right around the time we were leaving, I think, that it had to do with tax, because we had just instituted this new tax. So to get out of the tax thing, they said if you're what do they call it, an organization, like a charitable organization, you wouldn't have to pay the tax. So by not asking for a contribution from the public, you'd be taken off that, so you wouldn't have to pay that as an organization. But what they did was, you as a witness ordered the stuff and paid for it. You know, but it wasn't an established figure, like they couldn't charge you, but they gave you the amount that you should pay for it. Anyways, so everyone paid that amount.
Or more. Some gave more.
You were allowed to pay more. Yes, I remember that being point. And then when you went out in field service, if someone gave you a contribution, it was expected that you gave that to the organization as well. So in the end, they get paid twice for the same material.
So that's how they got around the charitable status thing.
Yeah, I don't know if that's just in Canada. Maybe somebody out there knows.
Let us know if you know that this was on a larger scale, but I remember the explanation didn't sit right with me at the time. I thought, no, they're actually getting more money,
Yeah.
probably, for
Yeah.
the publications than they did by charging a set price for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the next section, subhead, Ray goes into superimposing organizational concepts on scriptural terms. So again, how the Watchtower manipulates scripture to justify their policies.
Mm-hmm.